I really don't think Maxis understood what they were getting into when they were making Spore. I mean, sure, this game lets you evolve a species from a cell all the way to an intergalactic empire, but is that really enough to simulate evolution? I don't really think so. So I think to find out if Spore simulates evolution, I think we should dive deep into the game's 5 stages to figure out how this game simplifies millions of years of evolution and see if it's even accurate. And on the way, we'll learn more about how we went from this all the way to this. Spore begins with a massive meteor flinging itself onto the planet, crashing into the ocean and bringing life into the primordial soup. And from this rock egg thing, life is born, I guess. It's not that simple in real life. Okay, before we get a little too deep into the cell stage, I do want to clarify that Spore is trying to simulate a fantasy creature's evolution process, which means that it doesn't necessarily have to be held down by our current understanding of evolution. So then why compare it to humans' evolution? I think the 5 stages of this game represent either the stages we have or will hit as a species. I think having humans' evolution as a baseline comparison is helpful in seeing how Spore simulates evolution, even if it tries to do something different. That's the kind of the complicated thing with evolution in real life, is that our understanding of evolution is constantly evolving. Now, I might be getting a little bit over my head here, but here's how the earliest form of life might have looked like. So we obviously didn't have the luxury of having a camera present during the early stages of Earth's evolution. So a lot of early Earth's history is generally unknown. One scientific theory is that life started with simple organic molecules, which formed in Earth's atmosphere and were rained down into the Earth's oceans. Another is hydrothermic vents deep within the Earth's rich CO2 ocean created the proper environment for chemicals to mix together. The reality is, though, that those are just theories. We really don't understand the logistics of how early Earth on life came to be.
Nope.
And that's kind of one of the challenges that Spore has, is that our current understanding of evolution isn't cut and dry, meaning that what the game is simulating isn't actually based in fact, like getting a job in The Sims or placing roads in SimCity. And even those games take liberties in representing what they're trying to simulate. And ultimately, at the end of the day, these games are all about having fun first and having an accurate, realistic simulation second. I think the simulator genre can really go one of 2 ways. One is that it tries to be technically accurate, trying to mechanically simulate what its real world equivalent is, like a Microsoft Flight Simulator. And the other is that fun approach, where real world ideas or real world concepts are represented through gameplay. The thing with Spore is that being on the fun shelf was probably the right move for this game. I don't think anyone's expecting this game to start with nucleotides floating around in the water. I mean, can you imagine a kid playing that? So the cell stage in this game represents the cell as a literal living creature, personifying these weird little lumps of membrane into cute little animals. Or horrifying animals, depending on what you make. In real life, cells evolved based on what was advantageous for them to survive. So in the game, the player is tasked with eating other creatures to gain DNA points to upgrade their creature. And unsurprisingly, the role of evolution falls on the player. And the game kind of lets you do whatever you want. You can add more mouths to the creature to change what type of food it eats. Assuming you have enough DNA, you can surround your creature in spikes or these little tendril things. However, the player just randomly throwing things on their creature isn't going to work in their favor. It's kind of a light way to kind of push the player to evolve their creature in a way that kind of represents how traits evolved in real life animals through natural selection. It's just that here, natural selection is whatever the player feels like doing, even if it doesn't make any sense. Although maybe in real life, that's how it is too. Things that caused an animal to survive isn't necessarily the most optimal path, but simply what just worked. The hard part about having a whole stage dedicated around cells is that they don't do much. On the surface, at least. I mean, this is still a children's game after all. It's gonna be simple. But that kind of works out in this game's favor. It gives the player a safe environment to figure out Spore's core gameplay loop. There's also no real penalty for death, which allows the player to kind of experiment with what works for them. The thing with this is that it always means that the player succeeds, so that Spore is simulating the dominant creature of that planet at all times. In my mind, I guess a creature simulator might be able to simulate failure, potentially allowing the player to drive their creature to extinction. The thing is that unlike real life cells, rather than cells being able to work together to create more and speaking of that, it's time to grow a brain and evolve to the next stage. I'm a YouTuber, I don't get one of those. When creatures first evolved into land, Earth was very different than what it was today. You could say that Earth was going through just a bit of a phase.
Ugh, it's not a phase, Mom.
Some of the first verifiable footprints in the land date back to the Paleozoic. I hope that's how you say it. Most of the first creatures that kind of came on to land around this time were like weird hybrid creatures. They basically evolved to live in the ocean for millions of years prior to this point. None of this really matters though, because Spore skips all of it. So the great Zombodian emerges, ready to conquer this world. So creatures in this game just go from being a cell to a creature. And unlike Earth, Spore's planet never changes. There's no tectonic plate drifting, no dramatic climate change. This planet's actually very consistent. Understanding this is really important because life on Earth evolved not just based on what worked for them, but also what the Earth's environment literally allowed to happen. Throughout Earth's history, there's been several mass extinction events because when one species evolves to survive in a specific climate and goes extinct when that climate changes. That's just the challenge any game trying to simulate evolution is going to face. That's not to say Spore couldn't have gone further with the concept. It absolutely could have, and honestly should have. For example, if you've gone outside recently, you might have noticed that animals have a different way of living and reproducing depending on the animal. Shocker. In Spore, all creatures build a nest and lay eggs, regardless of whether or not it's physically possible for them to do that. And they basically all behave the same too. All creatures are essentially communal hunters and gatherers. While these creatures are all unique looking, it's all very surface level. Since they all basically behave the same, it makes the game feel very stiff and unreal. As a kid, this never really bothered me much, but as an adult, I'm starting to understand the criticisms this game got. Imagine if this stage actually had different types of nests that the creatures could make. Or at least break out some of the creatures into different types, like water-based creatures, land creatures, and sky creatures, that would all behave a little differently. Regardless, the gameplay of this stage is where the real meat of Spore is. The creature stage builds upon the framework the cell stage set. On top of the world now being in full 3D, the player has a hunger meter to manage, and the player can discover fossils buried in the ground to gain DNA points. And then, the player can also interact with other creatures with meaningful interactions. Sort of. It basically just boils down to mimicking the friendly action another nest wants to do, but it's at least something. There's far more purpose to the creature creator as well, as picking the correct parts to maximize your stats is key to survival. This isn't just for better gameplay. This aspect of the game really represents the concept of evolution much better than the cell stage. However, it's not in the ways you might think. When we think about evolution, we typically think about Darwin's theory of evolution. I mean, it is the theory that really popularized the idea that animals change over time. But I think the way Spore handles evolution is much more similar to Lamarck's theory of evolution versus Darwin's theory. Lamarck noticed that in animals he studied, they sometimes would share biological similarities, which led him to believe that Earth isn't fixed. Lamarck believed that an animal's desire in life would determine how its offspring would evolve. For example, according to Lamarck, giraffes used to be short kings, but short kings don't get the high leaves. So in life, the giraffe would continually reach out for higher leaves, thus leading over generations to longer and longer necks. And in Spore, the player directly decides how the creature evolves. So let's say your whole family migrates and leaves you behind. On your way over there, you might get wrecked by aggressive creatures. This can lead the player to desire more offensive parts, and they'll evolve their creature with that in mind. Understanding what interpretation of evolution a game will have is really important to understanding if it's even simulating it at all. Is your game representing evolution as a force of God? Then in the game, the player should take the role of a deity. So then should they really be limited to only controlling how they evolve one creature? If evolution isn't a force, but a natural process, then shouldn't the environment instead of the player determine what the creature looks like? Understanding this again is really important because it's like, what does evolution even look like in your game? And in Spore, they're simply concerned with the player's creature's evolution. Non-player creatures never actually evolve or progress in any meaningful ways. This little guy is always gonna look like this little guy. And in real life, creatures don't just evolve in a straight line. Their evolutionary tree diverges based on environmental factors. Spore makes evolution a theme of the game, rather than a direct simulator of it. And honestly, I don't think the technology was ready in 2008 for evolution to be fully simulated in a 3D world. And honestly, that's just kind of good game design. The cell stage directly prepares you for the creature stage, and the creature stage prepares you for the tribal stage. Right? Huh. Well, this is different. So by the tribal stage, millions and millions of years have passed. And from this point forward, the time scales are going to really slow down. And beginning with the tribal stage, these stages start to focus on societal evolution versus biological evolution. And that means the player can no longer change how their creature looks and can only clothe them with clothes. See, the Zombonians have their traditional neck rings, symbolic of the circle of life and their role in it. And stats are now tied to the clothes they wear. But I mean, generally, I don't think it matters that much at this point. What does matter is science. Yes. The earliest known evidence of modern day humans is around 315,000 years ago in modern day Africa. This was around the same time that Neanderthals existed, which I mean, it's just more evidence that species do not evolve just directly in a straight line. And so Spore takes the concept of Neanderthals and instead just throws a whole nother species for you to fight against. Like just imagine instead of a Neanderthal looking human-like, it was just this thing. The tribal stage combines thousands and thousands of years of human progress into one phase. But by doing so, it eliminates the crucial process of going from an animal to a sentient being. And maybe this is because we just don't know how humans have changed over time. But regardless, Spore skips over one major human advancement. You know, agriculture. You know, the very thing that allowed us to transition from nomadic hunter and gatherers to a permanent community. In fact, there's no farming in this game at all. Creatures instead just solely gather food from the nearby environment. So on top of feeding the tribe, food basically acts as a currency in this stage. By having it this way, it kind of reduces the complexity of the game. And honestly, I feel like this is kind of the stage where I hear a lot of people's interest drops off. Suddenly the game has changed from having one creature and evolving that one creature to now being a real-time strategy game. But the thing is that I don't know how you could even represent evolution past this stage without changing the gameplay. Because in real history, the technological advancements we only have because of shared knowledge. And the switch from controlling one creature to now controlling many represents that shift in advancement. For species to progress forward, they literally must work together to survive. And the mechanics really represent that. Building huts has far more impact than the clothes your creature is going to wear. And basically, the only way you're going to either win over a tribe through friendship or destroy them is in a group. The gameplay might look really different, but the core gameplay loop is actually really similar. And the thing is that as a game, it still is just really, and as a game, it's still a little repetitive. It's just a little repetitive. Although, when you think about it, aren't all our lives kind of repetitive? For centuries, we lived and died doing the same thing over and over again. Hunting for food, building a community, fighting for whatever we believe in. It's just that Spore doesn't focus on the individuality that we're forced to experience in our own lives, which can kind of lead to a bit of an apathetic feeling while playing. Like, sure, I can pretend to evolve the culture of the Zombodians. Like, they no longer wear neck rings because apparently people kept ripping them off in battle. But the thing is that the game never really encourages or rewards the player for doing it. There's no actual incentive in the game. And I think that's a huge reason as to why people lose interest in this stage. That driving force to change is largely self-reliant. Like, if you roleplay as a creature, you might end up having more fun. But each stage is so shallow, there's no reason to do that. Sure, you could try and min-max your stats, but each stage, again, is basically so easy that you never really die. Unless you're me, but I'm bad, so don't take after me. Now that being said, there are still some interesting ways that this game tries to represent evolution over the next two stages. So with that in mind, let's invent the ultimate form of civilization, capitalism! Unfortunately, Spore does not let you dump obscene amount of plastics into the ocean, and you can't put microplastics in people's brains. It's super lame. What it does let you do is interact with these wild, savage folk and civilize them. Look, they love the future! And you're never gonna guess what this stage does. The civilization stage takes our modern life and simplifies it. All of Spore's capitalist empires rely on one resource: spice. It's a reference to the Dune series spice, but it also kind of represents modern society's reliance on fossil fuels. Early on, the more spewing dust holes the player collects, the more passive income they'll make. And since Spore focuses on the bigger picture, it boils down complex societal relations into three paths. The religious path, in which you convert non-believers to your message. The player can be economical, initiating a trade route to eventually buying them out. And there's the military path, in which the player defeats their opponents in battle. This is the other problem with simulating evolution. As each stage progresses, the more complicated the real-world equivalent becomes. And that means that each stage has to take more and more liberties with how it represents evolution. But that's just the thing about this game. How much of our lives can you strip away before it's just a caricature of a living experience? How much of evolution can you gloss over before it's fundamentally unrecognizable? Spore has a tough job of creating a satisfying gameplay experience while having to literally pull from the entirety of this planet's existence. I just don't think there's a world in which a video game could represent evolution in a scientifically accurate way, period. I just don't think it's possible. So I could stand here all day and talk about what the civilization stage doesn't simulate. But I think it's interesting how Spore handles this stage, because the civilization stage is the cultivation of every other stage to this point. You might have picked up on this already, but Spore breaks down the main choices a player can make into three distinct choices: good, neutral, and evil. So in the cell stage and the creature stage, the player's morality is decided based on what diet they choose, and how they choose to eat, of course. And the thing is that the actions a player does in one stage will influence the perks they'll get in the next stage. So in the creature stage, since I befriended a bunch of creatures, I get a perk in the treble stage that makes befriending other tribes easier. This system rewards the player for picking a playstyle and evolving a creature that's moral beliefs stem from the behavior as a cell and a creature. And I guess this is just to simulate how creatures' biological nature is going to influence how they behave when they gain higher intelligence. And it makes sense in a way, until it doesn't. The civilization stage is about converting cities through three different forms of diplomacy. Advancing cities to the next stage requires that all cities are under the player's management. It's a unique idea because it recognizes that a modern civilization is about forming partnerships, and that being a spacefaring citizen requires multiple empires to cooperate to make that happen. The problem is that this stage's morality system is kind of at odds with the previous stages. Sure, an aggressive creature is probably going to have a civilization centered around warfare, but will an omnivore always be economic? I think the stage's system would work better if it was in addition to the moral choices a player can make. It would be closer to reality if instead of having to convert cities through any means, the player could start a trade route that starts like an alliance instead, rather than just buying out the city and converting them. Instead of having to use religion to convert the other society to the same belief system, it could be about providing assistance to them through public services. A lot of it would still boil down to, like, did you claim the city or are you in a partnership with the city? But I think having different means to the same end would be better at simulating advanced societal relationships. And Spore doesn't really consider how these ideologies get along. Yellow's been dominating the map this entire time. I mean, I've managed to form a partnership with them, but eventually it's just gonna be me versus them. They just took the final city and want to form an alliance. I like how this military nation has taken every city by force and all of a sudden is like, you know what? I'm kind of done with the military thing. We'll just join your nation. How about that? If only it was that simple in real life. I guess we go to space. The space stage is yet another major change in the gameplay. It's exciting because there are so many ways to tackle this concept. And I think it'll just be interesting to see how they'll handle evolution. Very quickly, find out my species is not alone in the galaxy. So the space stage takes a lot of inspiration from science fiction and makes the galaxy full of life. Honestly, this stage is probably just the most complex of them all. The player's tasked with spreading their empire throughout the galaxy, and doing so requires claiming planets, befriending or destroying alien civilizations, and it makes the game really open up with possibilities. I can take on missions, kill infected citizens, terraform planets, create crop circles, steal an ancient artifact from a temple. Whew. But if it wasn't for this green bar at the bottom telling me I ranked up, what would be the point of this all? This is the question I think humanity has to answer as well, because in real life, we don't get the green bar. Venturing out into the cosmos could expand our human empire and further understand our universe. Or it could be because of multiple large-scale wars, disregard for our environment that leaves the Earth uninhabitable. At least we still have Mars. At least we still have Mars. Humans naturally look for purpose, and we have a strong desire to know why. Why is the universe so big? What is our role in it? Spore is quick to give you purpose and direction, but that's because it's a video game. But I think a key part of simulating an intelligent species is the species asking why. This whole stage is kind of weird because the space stage is through the perspective of a single ship. But the task the player does feels like a multi-generational thing. And while it could represent multiple ships through different directions, I don't think the game really cares if that's the case. My home planet always refers to me as one person, and I receive military-like badges as I progress, which kind of implies again that I'm an individual rising through the ranks. The other stages don't ever refer to me personally as an individual, and then the individual creature, tribe, or city represents millions of years of progress. So it's kind of strange that suddenly one person is responsible for all of Zombodian's space progress. I guess I'm getting a little pedantic, and I'm bringing up these points because at the end of the day, simulating evolution is nearly impossible. Like, where does evolution stop? Even in real life, our current human form probably isn't our final form. Who knows what humans that settle onto other planets will look like in millions of years? But this topic is so fascinating to me because video games are kind of perfect for representing evolution. Usually games rely on a repeatable core loop that varies as time goes on. They're inherently cyclical. And as humans, we make games this way because nearly everything we experience in life is cyclical, which makes evolution, a naturally cyclical process, work really well in this medium. And that's why I made this video, because there's so much room for opportunity in this genre. Spore was limited by the time it was made and the fact that the game of this scale just did not exist. And we're here talking about it today because they prioritize making a good game versus an accurate one. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters.
Video complete.